Hey guys, Dan Carr here with ShutterMuse.com. Today we're going to be doing a video review of the Canon 200-400 f4 LIS. Now, this is one of Canon's most anticipated lenses, and many of you have already watched the unboxing video that I did when I first got this lens back in the summer. Now, I wanted to follow up that video with a really in-depth review, which I've put on the website. You can find a link to the review in the YouTube description here if you're watching directly on YouTube. And I'd urge you to follow along with that because there's going to be a lot of large sample photos there and things will kind of make a little bit more sense as I'm working my way through it. Now, this, as I said, is one of Canon's most anticipated lenses. They announced the development of it many years ago. I think it's about 3 years ago now. And Canon shooters were eagerly awaiting this because Nikon have had a 200-400 lens for a long time. In fact, the version 2 of their lens is already out and has been out for several years. So that's how long they've had a 200-400. And that focal length has been really popular with wildlife photographers and sports photographers because it's just a great range to have. And to be able to get through that range without having to put extenders on in the field allows you to get a lot of different looking images in a very short space of time. So it's a very versatile range. Now, when Canon came out with this lens, they really kind of shocked everyone by including a 1.4 extender inside the lens. So if you look at the side here, you can see this little bulge if you're not familiar with it. And basically by just flicking this little switch here, I can engage a 1.4 extender. So what this does is it actually gives you a 200 to 560 millimeter range in this lens. Now when you flick the extender, it goes from an f4 to an f5.6 lens. But with today's cameras and the quality of the ISO that you're able to get out of full frame cameras, having an f5.6 lens is not really a huge disadvantage as maybe it once would have seemed to have been, a few years ago. So this is a fascinating addition to the lens, and it's something that video cameras, lenses for video cameras have had for a long time in the ENG area. And in fact, Canon makes lenses with built-in extenders for video cameras, and they have done for some time. So they've just kind of borrowed the technology there, borrowed that idea, and put it into a still lens for the first time. So, I guess the other thing that people notice about this lens, apart from the extender, when they first look at it, is the price of it. There's no getting around the fact that this is a hugely expensive lens. The current retail price is $11,800. And it's around about the same price as the 600mm f4. It's a little bit less than the 800mm, but it's more expensive than the 500mm. So it kind of sits in the middle there, and Canon's super telephoto lenses have been hugely expensive recently since they came out with the version 2 of them. And the question is it worth the money? Are they that much sharper? Are you going to be able to get better images for your money? Now with this lens, being such a specialist lens and being such a unique lens, I really wanted to use it for a whole bunch of different situations. So I didn't rush my review out. I went and shot a whole bunch of different things with it. So I shot sporting events, I shot air shows with it because I think this is going to be a popular lens for aircraft photography. And then I shot some wildlife for it. I took it to Vancouver Island and I shot some black bears with it for a few days. And this really gave me a good feeling for how this lens works for a bunch of different scenarios, a lot of different photographers. So, I'll come on to the different uses specifically towards the end, but let's just walk through some more of the features as we're talking about this. On the side here, we have image stabilization, as with all of Canon's version 2 super telephoto lenses. This has a 4-stop image stabilizer. We've got 3 different stabilizing modes here. We've got one for panning, one for just holding it still, and then we have another one, which is the newer stabilization mode, which is if you're doing AI focus, and you put this to mode 3 basically, and this is to stop the image jumping in the viewfinder if you're doing servo tracking and moving the camera at the same time. I have to admit that I haven't really found a need to use that particular mode, but overall the image stabilization is great. It's just as you would expect it to be, and seems on a par with the super telephoto lenses that I've used. Moving further along, we have the rotating kind of PrePosition Switch here that we have on all the other super tele lenses. For those that don't know what that is, you can set a focal point. So I would focus on something, then I press the set button here, and then this ring here allows me to recall that focal position. So a quick flick of this and the lens will go back to that previous focus position. So if you've got two things you're shooting on, you can quickly jump the focal point back to the other one, which is really neat. And Canon also has implemented like a video shooting mode for this as well, which allows you to rack the focus smoothly between two focus points. So if you wanted to use this for video shooting, there's a little extra mode there. It certainly does look nice and smooth when it's racking the focus. You can do it at a couple of different speeds, and I think some people are going to find that pretty useful. The other thing, actually, I should mention as well, this foot on here is not the standard Canon foot. When Canon delivers the lens, it comes with 2 feet. There's a large one and a small one. And this is actually a third-party one. It's a Really Right Stuff replacement foot, and I have this because it fits into my gimbal head and my ball heads and things like that. And it's really neat that you can just unscrew 4 screws and replace the whole foot. I think that's great. So, overall, the next thing to talk about is, I guess, the size and the weight of this lens. It's heavier than the 500mm version 2. It's not quite as heavy as the 600mm version 2, so it sits right there in the middle. It's hand-holdable, but I wouldn't go to shoot an event, or I wouldn't go on a trip, shoot wildlife or anything like that, with the sole intention of hand-holding it the whole time. After a while, you definitely start to get the shakes a little bit, unless you're ridiculously strong. But it's just not worth, if you've got an expensive lens like this, buy a tripod that's gonna support it and put a gimbal head on it. If you need, you have that odd situation where maybe you're shooting from a dinghy, if you're shooting wildlife or something like that, yeah, it's perfectly possible to handhold it for a few minutes here and there. Which is nice because it's something that maybe the 600 is on the verge of not being quite so easy to do so, and certainly the old 600 was tricky to do that. So it's nice to have that ability. If you were having a long day, though, you're definitely going to want a monopod or a tripod for this thing. In terms of length, it's very slightly shorter than the 500mm, and it's a fair bit shorter than the 600mm. And, It fits into all the backpacks that I have. I think that's nice because the 600mm is that little bit bigger. That means I would have to have larger bags. So, it's in the end, it's not such a huge lens that it causes me too many troubles. I've actually got a lens coat cover on this, but this is the hood for it, so you can kind of appreciate the full length once it's got the hood on there. Another thing that's worth mentioning, if anyone's had the version 1 or the non-IS Canon Super Tele lenses, they will have had that faux leather cap that goes on the end, which was just a nightmare to deal with. All of Canon's version 2 lenses and the 200-400 come with this much nicer lid here. So imagine if this was on the lens right here. Essentially this just goes over like so. And then that Velcro's closed. It's much smaller, it's much easier to use in the field, and it's actually, it's really useful this time, whereas the other thing was just a huge pain in the ass on the old lenses. So that's great. So let's get into discussing how this works in the field and the kind of quality that you'd expect from it. If you're reading along with the review, you'll have seen some photos in there that I've included from air shows, sporting events, and shooting these bears. And I just want to really make the point about how versatile this built-in extender is. So we're just going to cut to some sample photos now. And this first photo here is a picture of a black bear shot at 200mm. And you can see it's kind of a nice environmental shot. It's a black bear, and we're on the coast of British Columbia here, and he's fishing for salmon. So you kind of got that coastal feel. You got the water there, and you got the rocks, and sometimes it's great to include a bit of the environment that the animal's in. So now we're zooming into 400mm, and we flipped it around to shoot a portrait orientation shot. And we have a totally different shot here right now. We've got a lot more detail in the bear. It's a lot more of a portrait of this bear. But it's still wide enough that you can see his feet, and it's giving a reasonable overall impression of the bear. And now we're going to flick to 560 millimeters with the 1.4 extender engaged. So right here, you can see again, how far this is zoomed in. Now it's basically a headshot of the bear. We've still maintained incredible sharpness with this 1.4 extender. And just comparing this back to the 200 millimeter shot, you can see the huge difference between these two shots. And these three shots were captured all within a second or 2 seconds of each other. So the ability to create 3 different looking shots in just that short space of time maximizes your time in the field. It maximizes your expenses that you paid to get somewhere to capture this event or these animals. And it brings back a much wider range of images for your editor or to go in your stock library or whatever it is you're shooting for. And I just want to reiterate as well the benefits of having a 1.4 extender built into the lens, because the benefit there is that the optical element that's in this bulge right here is designed along with the lens. So rather than with the external 1.4 extenders where you never know which lens it's going to be mounted to, this optic inside here is matched to the rest of this lens. So the result is that it's a little bit sharper than you might be used to if you're just putting a 1.4 extender externally, because the whole thing could be built together as one. So this is this is just a fantastic way to do things, and it really makes this, in my opinion, the best wildlife photography lens out there right now, because the 200 to 400 used to be popular, but every photographer you ask that use that lens, they're always putting the 1.4 extender on occasionally as well. And now I can just do this at the flick of a switch. So yeah, just fantastic lens for shooting wildlife, and the sharpness, even wide open, as you can see in the examples in the review, wide open at f5.6 with the extender engaged, the sharpness is incredible. And I blind tested myself on many images, and not every, sometimes I could tell when the extender was engaged, sometimes I couldn't. Sometimes it's that good that you just couldn't even tell. So to have this kind of range, 200 to 560, available at your fingertips, and to be able to produce such amazingly sharp results is just phenomenal. And for me, it totally justifies the price. There's some other things to talk about as well. I think autofocus speed is something a lot of people have been wondering about. I'm going to say right now that it's not as fast at autofocus as the version 2 Super Telephoto Prime. So we're talking 300, 400, 500, 600 version 2. It's not as fast as them. I would say that it's on a par with the AF speed of the version 1 Super Tele Primes, and no one ever really complained about those. So it's not that it's bad, it's just I get the impression from using it for all these different shoots, I just getting that impression that it's not quite as fast. And I've used both the version 1 and version 2 Super Tele Prime, so I kind of peg this lens against those reasonably well. If you include the 1.4 extender, as soon as you flick this in, there is a noticeable slowdown in servo tracking, AI servo mode for autofocus. Again, it doesn't make it bad. It's just something to be aware of, particularly if something was coming directly at me. I found that there was a little bit of slowdown there that was noticeable. So it's something to bear in mind. If I wouldn't, for that reason, I wouldn't buy this lens if you intended to shoot at 560 all the time. It's not that kind of lens. If you're going to do that, then buy the 500. It's going to be faster for you. But if you want to use that range from 200 to 560, then brilliant. The other thing you can do is you can actually put another extender on the end here. Now I forget exactly what focal length that gives you. It gives you something 560 times 1.4 is up in the 800 somewhere. You go to an f8 native lens when you do that. I've tried this. I gotta say I was quite surprised how well it locked onto focus in that mode, and I was reasonably surprised at the sharpness. It's definitely usable in an emergency. If you were out in the plains of Africa, maybe in Kenya, where wildlife tends to be a little bit further away. Wherever you shoot in places like Africa, it's a little bit different, but in Botswana, then you might be doing very well with a 200 to 400 range, but maybe in Kenya you're going to need something longer. Then you can definitely put another extender on this and still get pretty decent results. I was quite impressed with that, I have to say. So moving on to the general usages of this lens, as I said, I used it for sports, I used it for wildlife. We've already really covered the wildlife, and I think hands down this is the best wildlife photography lens on the market from any manufacturer right now. For sports, I would say you know, it doesn't compare. It compares in sharpness to the version 2 Super Tele lenses. Believe it or not, I think this is just, it's incredibly sharp. But the AF speed is definitely a little bit less. So if I was a sports photographer full time, you know, I do a fair bit of it, but it's not the only thing that I do. If I was a sports photographer all the time, I would not choose this lens. I would still choose a 400 or a 500 probably. What it is great for, though, is somebody like me who finds himself shooting something a little bit different each week. Then it just has all your bases covered. The 200 to 400 range is also a great lens for photojournalism, I think, with a 24 to 70, a 70 to 200, and this 200 to 400. If you're a photojournalist professionally, I think this is an incredible 3-lens kit to have, and you're really going to be able to do just amazing things with that combination. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is air shows. This is an example that I put in the review as well and included an image or two. Typically, the best air show lens that people have had has been the 100 to 400 from Canon. That's a really popular lens to use at air shows. So it stands to reason that the 200 to 400 is going to be very popular as well. I tried this at an air show myself, and I had a wonderful time with it. It's great because when you're shooting formation flying, when you've got maybe 9 planes in a formation, you tend to want to zoom out, you know, 300, 200 as they're getting closer. You can capture the full formation. But then when you've got a singular plane doing a display, or maybe a pair of planes that split off from the main formation, then you can punch into 400 or engage the converter, be it 560, and you've got that plane, you know, almost filling the frame in front of you if you're right on the flight line. So again, that versatility just means that this is the one lens you would need to do an air show, really. And you know, apart from walking around doing your statics, you're going to need something else for that. But other than that, you know, it was just a fantastic experience again to use this lens for that. So I would encourage you to go to the link below in the discussion, in the video description, and take a look through the review, have a look at the images. But you know, this lens is going to be with me for a very long time. I've been hugely impressed with it, and I think it's worth every penny. You know, your mileage may vary on that. It definitely depends if you're making your living from photography. If you're not, I would highly recommend renting this lens. You know, Borrow Lenses, Lens Rentals Canada, all these guys will have this lens for you to try out. And even if you are thinking about buying it, it's not a bad thing to test it out first. But for me, this is just it's a optical masterpiece from Canon. It really is. I'm not really sure what else I can say. I think the images in the review speak for themselves. So thanks for watching. Like I said, I hope you check out the review and the images in the link below as well. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching.